Hello everyone, my name is Veronica Fitri Rianasari. Here I will present my article entitled Indonesian Mathematics Teachers' View on Distance Learning Barriers During the Early of COVID-19 Pandemic. This research is a part of our research project and the team members of this project are Bapak Dr. Hongki Juli and Ibu Maria Suci Apriani, MSc. We are interested in doing this research because first, as we know, the COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted the education sector in Indonesia. This pandemic resulted in an unplanned shift from traditional face-to-face learning into distance learning. And of course, teachers and students need to adapt to a new learning setup that involves digital teaching and learning. There also has been ample research investigating potential barriers that might contribute to teachers' reluctance to adopt new technology. Recent studies also show that Indonesian mathematics teachers had lacked knowledge and skill of ICT and also the ICT-related pedagogical content knowledge. For teachers who have lacked knowledge and skill about the integration of ICT in education, they might get difficulties in conducting distance learning that runs in the form of online learning. Good quality digital infrastructure in Indonesia remains a major challenge. Based on Statistic Indonesia, there is a very significant difference between the number of internet users in urban areas compared to those in rural areas. The quality of internet connection in Indonesia is also poor. This study aims to describe the views of Indonesian mathematics teachers on distance learning barriers during the early of COVID-19 pandemic. There are two research questions. First, what are the barriers that Indonesian mathematics teachers view as significant in distance learning during the early of COVID-19 pandemic? And second, what are efforts taken by Indonesian mathematics teachers to overcome distance learning barriers during the early of COVID-19 pandemic? Since we want to describe a phenomenon in education during the COVID-19 pandemic, then the study employed a descriptive research design. The study involved 415 teachers, 143 among them are male and the rest and 272 are female. They came from 27 provinces in Indonesia and the majority of them came from Java. We used an online questionnaire and we opened it for 2 weeks from April 16 until April 30, 2020. In analyzing the data, we used the qualitative data analysis framework from Miles and Huberman. For the first research questions, in answering the first research questions, the participants were asked to mention learning barriers that they faced during COVID-19 pandemic. Table 1 here shows that more than 50% of the teachers perceive that designing lessons, motivating students to be able to learn independently, choosing an effective distance learning platform, encouraging students to be actively engaged in distance learning and weak internet connections, and also designing student-centered learning are the significant barriers that they perceive during the early of COVID-19 pandemic. And then we classified the barriers into two classifications, namely the pedagogical dimension and non-pedagogical dimension. This classification was made based on the consideration that distance or online learning not only requires infrastructural or logistic support, for example, internet connection and technological devices, but also pedagogical support. They need pedagogical support so that they can effectively integrate technology into their learning design. Table 2 here shows that around 98% of the teachers perceive barriers related to pedagogical dimension and around 70% of the teachers perceive non-pedagogical barriers during distance learning. After investigating the barriers, and then to answer the second risk questions, the teachers were asked to mention effort that they take to overcome the barriers. The table 3 shows that barriers show that effort that they took, that the effort taken by more than 70% of the teachers are using available resources and learning independently from available sources. And then they also were asked whether the efforts taken helped them to overcome the barriers. Here, figure 1 shows that around 80% of the teachers perceived that the effort they took helped them to overcome the barriers during distance learning. And to provide better insight toward their experience in doing the transition from face-to-face learning to distance learning, they were asked whether the distance learning during the pandemic is more challenging than face-to-face learning. Here, figure 2 shows that more than 60% of the teachers agree that distance learning is more challenging. Based on the analysis, there are 2 points of discussion. First, the study revealed that most of the barriers perceived by at least 40% of the participants are related to the pedagogical dimensions of distance learning, namely designing lessons in distance learning, motivating students to learn independently, encouraging students to be active in designing student-centered learning, promoting students' critical and creative thinking, and conducting authentic evaluations. The 2 most efforts carried out by teachers are efforts that can be done by the teachers themselves, namely using available resources and learning independently from available sources. For the conclusion, this study reveals that barriers related to pedagogical dimension were perceived as the significant factors hindering the implementation of distance learning during COVID-19 pandemic. Combining the findings of this study with our earlier findings about teachers' responses during distance learning, we found that their struggles related with pedagogical aspect of distance learning might become reasonable reason for them for choosing teacher-centered learning as their main learning approach. Moreover, this study also reveals that to overcome the barriers, most of the teachers took some effort that can be done by the teachers themselves, namely using available resources and learning independently from available sources. That's all my presentation. Thank you for your attention.